Welcome everyone, also the people connected online to this open conference, Designing Policies for a Resilient Europe. And we are very happy to host this in at the University of Ferrara, in Italy, and to have a very nice group of people that joined the meeting and the conference here in the room. And I'm very happy for those that are connected online. Just to say a few words about the project. I'm Matias Barberis. I'm the coordinator of the Future Resilience Project, a project that intends to work on how we can create policies for societal resilience. We have set up 10 Future Resilience Labs that are implementing different methodologies based on foresight and participatory processes to work with different challenges and think and rethink and reprocess how we can, in practical terms, think about resilience. A topic that today we are going to discuss with the three key speakers coming from different parts of Europe and with different background. And the idea of today is to really touch upon different sides of this concept that is quite abused in policy documents, reworked and work a lot and in deep and exchange in the academic world. So the idea is to have a bit of a discussion about the policy, the societal and economic side of the concept. So I will leave you in very good hands of Jörgen Sparf, that will moderate the session today and present the speakers. So Jörgen.
Thank you, Matias. Hi, everyone. With short notice, I'm jumping in as moderator, so I'll do my best. We are gathered here under the heading of Designing Policy for a Resilient Europe. Sounds like intriguing. It's just that there's a lot of problems with that, because what is resilience, first of all? And what is a policy? Well, it can be many different things. And then there's a design component. Well, designing can be many different things, and there are so many stakeholders and interests and power relations involved in this. So there's a lot of challenges there. So it's not a neat process, and we will learn more about that in this session, I'm sure. So with us today here, we have three speakers. First of all, there's Giliberto Capano, and then we will listen to Massimiliano Mazzanti. No?
It's Francesco.
Francesco, I'm so sorry. We changed from the program. Okay. Things happen. We are dynamic here. And then Valeria Rijana. So first of all, you may sit, and I'll leave the floor to Giliberto Capano, who is a professor of political science and public policy at the University of Bologna here in Italy. And I'll leave it to you.
May I start? It's okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I have always problems with the microphone, but I need it because otherwise the audience online cannot get my words. When I've been asked to, let's say, to say something to this round table, I immediately thought I can say something about policy design, but pay attention because I'm negatively biased respect to the word resilience. So I'm a policy scholar. I do research on policy design, policy instruments. For me, whatever it means resilience, policymakers should design robust policies to get it. And first of all, so I will try to, doesn't work. Okay, I will talk about policy robustness, but first allow me to say something about resilience, because it is important to have clear what is, for me, substantially unclear. Because if we want to design policy for resilience, we should know something about that, which is not simple, because it's, I think, at least a couple of decades that this catchy word, resilience, resilient, is part of the political discourse at the EU level. Is a wonderful word that has been bought by real sciences. I'm a social scientist, so the real sciences are the hard sciences. And then, as usual, when you borrow something, you say, betray the original meaning and so on. So let's allow me to say, okay, there are here the meaning of resilience for different disciplines. Okay, in a very synthetic way, for psychology, resilience means when a person is rebounding from a personal trauma. For ecology, an example, resilience means the forest regrowth after a wildfire or coral reef restoration. For a community, we have an example, a city recovery plan after a natural disaster. Engineering, the serious original field of the word. Resilience, building engineering to withstand earthquakes. You know, Japan, when you have a earthquake, you have a resilient building, you know what I mean. And then in economics, resilience means, example, quick economic recovery post-recession. But the two main meaning are these two. Resilience in engineering and physics means the ability of a system, typically a material, to absorb energy before breaking down when subject to a dynamic perpendicular force or shock. Resilience, for example, is high when a material has a high level of elasticity. And then in social science, that means many science, resilience starts to represent the ability of a social entity, such an individual, organization, system, or society, to retain its function while responding to adversity. And in social sciences, resilience has been interpreted in very different ways. Means bouncing back, adaptation, and transformation. Substantially, every kind of reaction to a crisis, to a turbulence. And this is, let's say, let's take everything in the meaning, is well represented in the EU documents. For example, in the 2020 Strategic Forestry Report, resilient is the ability not only to withstand and cope with challenges, but also to undergo transition in a sustainable, fair, and democratic manner. And if you take the EU Joint Research Center report, you can see that a resilient society, you are here to talk about societal resilience, is able to cope with and react to shocks or persistent structural change by either resisting to it, by adopting a degree of flexibility and making small changes, adaptation, and at the limit, when disturbances are not manageable anymore, the system needs to engineer bigger change, transformative capacity. So for EU, resilience means absorption, that is bouncing back, adaptation and transformation, everything. And this is clear when you take, this is an example, and I perfectly know that you cannot get, but this is a figure from the dashboard on the project EU website on societal resilience, in which there are indicators of resilience. You have V, vulnerability indicators, and C, capabilities indicators. Substantially, they are saying that the more higher the adult participation in learning during the last 15 months, the higher the resilience. That means that the EU is presenting output and outcome indicators of resilience, but these indicators could be indicators of many other things substantially. Why? Because you can talk in terms of effectiveness of the higher education system, effectiveness of of the work market system and so on. So just to say, we should pay attention when we talk in terms of resilience. So what is the resilience? Is a measure of something? Is a feature of something? Is a philosophy of something? Is it a capability, a property, a goal? And when we talk about resilience, are we talking of the resilience of whom? When we talk about societal resilience, society is not an holistic thing. Oh, you can imagine society like an holistic thing. Society is made by individual groups, different ideas, different interests. Resilience for what? When? Under what conditions? Isn't resilience necessarily positive? I give you an example. The idea of recovery, bouncing back. A society of something, an institution, is good if it is resilient. But in this way, resilience, it could mean resistance to change. Do you think that, I give you a stupid example, if think all the people who during the French Revolution were in the squares fighting against the monarchy power, and they won, but after a few years they got Napoleon, and after Napoleon, you had a perfect bouncing back of the system, monarchy again. Is this positive for these people? So we should pay attention on this. What I'm trying to say, that personally I think that resilience, in a way or another, is a kind of purpose that policymaker and also society could have to make them more capable to deal with challenges. And so, let's say, resilient everything, but we should be conscious of the fact that resilient from a scientific point of view is very, very problematic, and actually has more, let's say, a political, and I use this adjective in a very neutral way, a political, is a kind of political instrument for political discourses. What are the core components of resilience when we talk about whatever it means, societal resilience? In terms of recovery capacity, you have a speed of response, effectiveness of restoration, resource mobilization, system reconstruction. In terms of adaptation, learning from disturbances, how many times we can read the pieces on societal resilience. In terms of adaptation means that the institution, the society has been capable to learn, for example. Evolution, modification of structure, evolution of process, innovation, capacity, and so on. And then you have the core components of the transformative potential of resilience. What I'm saying, whatever you define resilience, and assuming that we mean a systemic goal or a political and policy societal goal that we have in improving the capacity of specific policy from environmental to healthcare and so on to perform at the best, even in situations in which there are dramatic challenges. I think that whatever you define, the three core dimensions of resilience can be driven by different factors. And one of these factors, from my point of view, is policy robustness. That means policies made in a specific way to reach specific goals. Robustness is like resilience, is another word that social scientists have borrowed by, let's say, art sciences, and usually is described, sometimes it stops, I don't know why, is described as the ability of a system to withstand perturbation in a structure without changing function. This is a more art science-driven definition. Then the capacity of an organization to retain its fundamental pattern at the core characteristic under changing conditions, and socio-economic definition, the ability of various political economic arrangements to generate prosperity in the face of less than ideal conditions. Robustness, all in all, is the capacity to perform of a system, an institution, let's say, I'm exaggerating, of an individual, to perform at the best, even under pressure. Put roughly, at the beginning of the COVID-19, South Korea healthcare system has shown to be more robust than many healthcare systems in the Western world. So same challenge, very, very, very dramatic. From you had a higher capacity of the healthcare system to work daily in the same way like before in South Korea respect to many other countries. Robustness is not simple stability, and robustness is not adaptability, because you need the robustness to be adaptable. And then from robustness, we go to policy robustness, that refers to the ability of a policy-making framework of the governance arrangement to perform consistently and effectively across a wide range of conditions, uncertainties, and potential disruption. What we would like to have policy that allow us to have a good delivery of healthcare, even if we got an incredible flood, to have a good way of working of our schools, even just after an earthquake, and so on. And from my point of view, being a public policy scholar, policy robustness is a pivotal driver, not the only one, a pivotal driver, probably a necessary condition for getting the three core dimensions of resilience in any way or whatever you define resilience. These are 4 cases of policy robustness, for real cases of policy robustness. In yellow, the Dutch Delta program, in which you can see how they have designed multiple scenario planning, flexible implementation strategy, and blah, blah, blah. You have the South Korea pandemic response, early warning system, rapid testing capacity. This has been designed in advance, and this is because their first reaction to COVID-19 has been better than ours, and so on. Then you have the Basel III agreement, is an international regulatory framework for banks. It is very important. After the crisis of 2008, we had a new policy at the international level, let's say, to deal with potential future financial crisis, and that has been designed. And then you have the Australian National Drought Policy and water allocation, pricing mechanism, conservation requirement are all characteristic of a policy that has been designed in advance that made or makes this Australian policy robust against the risk of droughts that they have. So let's say that from my point of view, policy robustness is a property you can design of the institutional, organizational, and processual dimension, thanks to which you can pursue resilience in practice. Again, the resilience means policy robustness does not happen by itself, but must be designed by policymakers. And in the literature of policy design, you can find various components of a robust policy. And for you, I have grouped them in 3 clusters, but just to clarify what I mean, when you want to design robust policy, there are some relevant organizational dimensions that could work. To be clear, this is a list of factors, then the way you combine them makes the difference. It's simply an analytical list. From the organizational point of view, diversity is very important, because the diversification of the distribution of power and the range of sources needed is very important when you design a robust policy. Modularity, that means substantially that you should design from the organizational point of view a policy in a modular way. A unit should be capable to do something, can stay in a specific part of the public organization, but then the same module could be transferred to do something different. Redundancy. Redundancy looks to be inefficient, but the presence of organizational duplication could be useful. Polycentricity, a pluralistic governance arrangement, is always very important. What you do in your policy labs is to involve stakeholders substantially. We know that involving stakeholders in the governance system is important. From the organizational point of view, a robust policy should provide for the appropriate training of the individual of the organization, the correct training in terms of developing capacity to deal with unplanned response. We need people in the organization of each policy capable to react in an innovative way when let's say, homogeneity is a challenge. And then there is scalability, the capacity of the organization to rapidly mobilize and demobilize sources. Then we have instrumental dimension. I'm running now because I have only 3 minutes. Prototyping, the design and redesign of a solution to problems in an iterative way through experimentation and rapid feedback. Probably in some of your labs, you are doing this. You are creating prototypes and trying to check if it works. Bricolage, the use of combination of ideas and tools. Strategic polyvalence, the capacity to design solutions that can take new direction according to the context. And dynamism, the adoption of instruments that promote interaction and agreement between the main policy actor over time. The idea is that we need procedural tools that in a way or another push all the actors to interact constantly during the policy process. And then you have the political institutional dimension, coordinated autonomy. Every policy to be robust should give autonomy to the peripheral units, but through a process of well-done coordination. Bounded autonomy, that means substantially that the local implementer should have autonomy, high autonomy, but limited in a specific way. And then there is the problem of political institutional capacity, that is the ability to manage, response, and prepare to unexpected crises. And this is clearly the political institutional capacity, the more complicated to design. In conclusion, these 3 clusters from an analytical point of view show how complex it can be to achieve resilience through policy robustness. In fact, the dimension of the policy robustness I have presented are not easy to design concretely because they imply capacity, analytical, operational, and political capacity, and not necessarily to have analytical capacity means that you will design robust policy. You can try to sell all the evidence-based policy you want to policymakers to increase their analytical capacity, but there are barriers to design robust policy. But eventually we can talk another time about capacities. What is relevant here is that resilience, societal, economic, and political, is only possible if policies are designed in an appropriate way. That is, according to the context, in a robust way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Giliberto. That was a crash course in robustness and policymaking in 5 minutes, no, 20 minutes. Thank you so much. If people online have questions, you can post them on the chat. I believe you have the ability to look at that. Okay, thanks. I want to invite everybody here, if you have any questions or comments to what Giliberto has said already. But I might break the ice and asking, so resilience is such a broad concept. So there's really not one resilience policy, because what is the policy domain then, or policy area? So how should one go about? Is it even possible to design robust policies when we talk about societal resilience, or is it more for the technical side?
Policy is never only technical, you know what I mean? You need to find an equilibrium between what you define or you call the technical dimension and the political dimension. That is not only what policymaker wants, but what people perceive they want. So when you have to design a robust policy, you have to very often to convince not only policymaker, but people that could be convenient for them to accept a certain type of robust policy. Think, for example, just to be very, very rough, as you know, I'm not a very diplomatic guy. Think to all the people that in Italy 1 year ago, exactly in this region, or a few days ago in the region of Valencia in Spain have been touched by the flood, you know what I mean? If you have tried 2 months before the flood to convince people living in certain pieces of the part of the territory that, you know, we, the policymaker, I'm the measure of, I'm thinking to a new strategic plan that in 20 years we will relocate you to another place. Just to give you an example. So when we talk about policy robustness, we are talking about a mix of technical dimension and political dimension. Evidence is not enough, because evidence is never enough. You can have the best evidence-based policy to offer to policymakers, but you should be capable to convince, again, policymakers in democracy, their voters, that this evidence is not something that is very bad, but is something that could help to live better in the medium long run. So policy robustness is let's say, a strong political component, because you have to legitimize, let's say, the technical dimension. Put in another way, evidence does not legitimate by itself. This is one of the problems we social scientists, especially the hard scientists or those working on more serious things, are very difficult in understanding. Evidence that for us as scientists can be reliable according the good methodology adopted and so is not self-evident and self-legitimizing for the people. And this is the, let's say, the political side of resilience, but from my point of view of policy robustness.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions in the room? Let's start with Feline here.
Thank you for this very inspiring and thought-provoking talk. But I'm not sure I fully understood this difference you made between resilience and robustness. I mean, you said, thanks to robust policies, you can pursue resilience. But then the characteristics you mentioned of robust policies, they were to me the typical characteristics of resilient systems: diversity, modularity, redundancy, polycentric. That's characteristic of resilient system, not of policy. You have not a polycentric policy, no? So maybe I got confused.
Because I don't know what you do in your what is your specialty, but it echoes to me the ecological system perspective to resilience. Sure, a system should be modular, but means that it is resilient, but it is modular if you are talking about healthcare or education or whatever, if you have designed it in that way. So from my point of view, policy robustness is the tool through which you get the final result that is resilient. You know what I mean? If you want a system resilient, you don't need, again, only policy robustness, but you need to design institution in a specific way, relations among actors in a specific way. So I would say means and end. Robustness, policy robustness is the mean, and resilience is the end.
Hi, Giliberto, thanks for this. I'm not sure, I think it's a question or a comment to this. You talked about the floods in Spain, and traditionally crisis management is, as Peter May said, is a policy without a public. So it's event driven. So I think you throw a spanner in the works when you talk about responding to crises when people are not willing to take action ahead of time. And then something happens and then all hell breaks loose. So do we need to have something extra when it comes to robustness in policy when it's specifically about dealing with crises? Or do we have to be extra proactive? Or do you know what I mean? Does it make sense?
Yes, from an analytical point of view, it's quite clear that we are talking about crisis. It's not all those. I think that there are people working on climate change, for example, no? And you have a problem. The problem is that you have to convince millions of people in every country or in each country that climate change is a serious thing and that it will damage not only their real life, but above all the life of the children and the grandchildren and so on. It's quite clear that here we are in let's say, the deep core of societal value, and so we need politics. So this is another thing. We should talk about how we can address better social value, about political and policy elite and so on. But I would say this would be another point. We can only say what should be done, but if you get the last dimension was the political capacity, and the political capacity is the capacity, put in a very rough way, of let's say, political elite to legitimize new solutions. If you want transformation, if you want only bouncing back or absorption, it's quite clear that the political capacity needed is lower. When you have this kind of flood, very often you have a kind of, let's say, bouncing back with a minimal adaptation. Why? Because from the political point of view, it's less expensive. To have a transformation, that means let's design in the most appropriate way from the policy robustness perspective. The policy respects climate change, environmental problems, and so on. It's quite clear that you have higher political cost, and you are asking people to have less, sorry for the joke, less resilient values. So, thank you for the question.
Thank you so much for that, Gilberto. I think we will close this talk now. So thank you very much for your intervention and the questions and
thank you.
Discussion. Thanks. Yes, Right, so let's move on to the second speaker of today, who is Francesco Nicolli from this University of Ferrara. He's associate professor at the Department of Economics and Management with an interest in environmental economics, renewable energy, and climate policy. So over to you, Francesco.
Something went wrong, sorry. Okay. So, well, yeah, my name is Francesco Nicolli, and well, when I've been asked to give this presentation, basically, it took me a while to understand what to talk about, because, I mean, as as you've been told, I'm basically teaching renewable energy and I'm teaching climate change economics. So, and considering the first presenter was talking about the technical aspect of resilience policies, I decided to move the discussion slightly more on the political aspect of resilience policies. And I wanted to share with you my experience while working with climate change policies and also with another global threat, which is not highly discussed among economists, which is antimicrobial resistance. And I will explain you in a while I think that talking about antimicrobial resistance is relevant for our discussion about resilience. Okay, well, we've been discussing quite extensively today what is resilience, but what I want to highlight in this presentation, the idea that I want to give you is that learning can be seen as a vital component on the discussion, on the political discussion about resilience, if we see and consider resilience as with the long-term perspective, okay? As we know, as Professor Capano explained us before, the concept of resilience goes beyond immediate response. Of course, immediate response is vital, it's crucial. It's the first part of the discussion, but resilience, it also involves creating systems that can recover quickly and are better prepared for future risks. So when looking at the discussion about resilience policies, I can see that there is sometimes a trade-off and other times a confusion between short-term and long-term goals. Okay, the short-term goals are quite clear. We've been discussing the short-term goals, and the long-term goals means exactly creating systems that can recover quickly and in which the precondition for needing a resilient system exists. Okay, and this, of course, has to do with the whole discussion in climate policies about adaptation versus mitigation. Okay, with adaptation, of course, we mean adjusting to climate impacts, and with mitigation, we mean reducing climate impacts. Okay, so in economic terms, adaptation involves investing in infrastructure. Okay, which in some sense help us to cope with climatic shocks, while mitigation entails shifting sustainable practice to lessen future risks. Okay. And of course, I mean, I'm the delegate for this university for the COP 28, 9, and whatsoever meeting. And exactly the difference between adaptation and mitigation is one of the key topics, along with compensation of the upcoming COP 29 in Baku. And the key aspect of the discussion between adaptation and mitigation is that in the international debate, especially in the COP event, there is kind of an agreement about adaptation policies, while, as we all know, there is less of an agreement about mitigation policies. Okay, when it comes to climate change, there's, I don't think, well, sorry. There's a nice publication by the World Bank. I put the reference in the slide, but it's not projected in full screen. Anyway, there's a nice publication by the World Bank, which is actually telling us, which is actually summarizing a lot of interesting, good experiences, best practices from around the globe about resilience in urban context. For instance, this is a picture taken in India, which is telling us a story which is actually now becoming quite common also in Europe, as we are all aware. And the first type of resilience policies that comes to people's mind when it comes to coping with climate change are, of course, early warning system, okay? These World Bank reports are telling us the experience of India, in which, for instance, there are extreme heat warnings, which actually help to save thousands of lives, and other example of warning system which help to cope with flooding and other type of emergencies, okay? In this other picture taken from the same World Bank publication, we can see the total amount of people that are exposed to highly vulnerable, the total amount of people that are considered vulnerable to climate disaster around the globe, but we all know that this picture is actually completely changing, you know? So this is a picture which are telling that some part of the globe are exposed to climatic disaster, but it's also a picture which is telling only a partial story, because it's a picture that is changing continuously. And this changing continuously actually poses a threat to the development and to the formation of resilient and especially climate policies, okay? Because it's actually hard sometimes to predict which will be the future challenges, okay? Another important area of discussion when it comes to resilience in the climate change debate is the threat posed by climate change on the agricultural system. Okay, the agricultural system, as we all might know, is highly impacted by climate change for several reasons. There are extreme events like drought, but also, of course, there are other aspects of climate change that impact on the agricultural system, like rising temperature and change in precipitation patterns. Adapting and coping with climate change in the agricultural system means something different from different parts of the world, okay? For late development countries, adaptation strategies primarily involve strategies to like diversification of agricultural asset, diversification of livestock asset, okay? Those are all strategies that are in a sense helping to cope with climate change, because climate change eat differently different crops depending on the severity and the length of the drought. And so, of course, having a diversified asset can help people to be more resilient in the short term to this dramatic event. However, what the experience of the previous COP and of previous climate agreement is telling us that if from the one hand, there is a strong emphasis and a lot of international support for short-term strategies to address climate change in the agricultural system in low-income countries. From the other hand, there is still lacking a long-term strategies to help those areas to cope with the sources, the causes of climate change. Different is the discussion when it comes to, for instance, to European countries. Of course, there are many countries in Europe, many agricultural systems in Europe that need to cope with climate change. For instance, the French agriculture, especially wine-producing regions, tend to be vulnerable to climate change. They tend to have crops which are vulnerable to climate change. And in those countries, the response that countries give to the rising cost in agriculture due to climate change is through innovation, okay, to the search of climate-resistant crops, more efficient irrigation system, and adapting farming techniques. And those strategies are being supported by the national governments. And what I want to say with this first part of the presentation, before moving to antimicrobial resistance, is that if from the one hand, it seems clear to me, and it seems clear by watching and reading about the most recent international agreement and international cooperation treaty, when talking and discussion about resistance, about resilience, if from the one hand, for research, it's quite clear which are the technical aspects of resilience policies that are relevant, and I'm referring once again to previous presentation, from a political aspect, what I see is that there is a strong emphasis towards short-term resistance policies, which are actually helping society to cope with the short-term effect, which are of course crucial, but there is less emphasis to long-term strategies to reduce the root cause of the problem. Another example that I want to present to you and I want to discuss with you, because I think it's relevant but still understudied, at least by economists and social scientists in general, is the global threat of antimicrobial resistance. Antimicrobial resistance is probably something that you've all heard about, and is a global threat that poses significant risk to public health, food security, and economic development. Public health, because of course, well, what is the antimicrobial AMR? Antimicrobial occurs when bacteria and virus become resistant to antibiotics or antimicrobials in general. Okay, so it becomes harder to control diseases, okay? And it's a threat to both the economic system and the society, because first it's a threat to human health, okay? Because of course, antimicrobial resistance can make antibiotics less efficient. And it's also a threat to the productivity of the agricultural system, because antimicrobial resistance actually reduces significantly the productivity of the livestock sector by making disease control way less efficient. Okay, and there is also a link between the livestock sector and the agricultural system in general, and the overall impact of antimicrobial resistance for human health, because resistance often developed in the livestock sector due to the misuse or overuse of antimicrobials. There's a very popular study published in 2019 by Murray and colleagues, which estimated that almost 5 million of deaths in 2019 were associated with antimicrobial resistance, and more than 1.27 million are actually attributable to bacterial antimicrobial resistance, okay? This, of course, translate into a huge costs for the European healthcare system, which translates to about 11.7 billion euros, which is more or less 25 euros per person. Okay, so antimicrobial resistance is a global threat which has to do with human health, animal health, and ecosystem services, and is a threat which requires robust and resilient policies to cope with them. And once again, I want to stress that if from the one end, and one other aspect which makes antimicrobial resistance a topic which is common to climate change is that also antimicrobial resistance is a global problem, okay? Because basically you can import resistant bacteria with trade, okay? If you import a piece of meat or eggs or milk or whatever product which has been produced in a country in which there are resistant bacteria, you're basically importing the bacteria in your country. So it's a global problem which spread widely through trade. Okay, so what I see in this debate is that even if there are strong heterogeneity across different countries, AMR is a problem which require both emphasis on the short term and the long term. Of course, the short-term strategies involve research of new antibiotics, especially for last resort stages, and it requires strengthening the healthcare infrastructure, which is basically the strategies that many groups are proposing. And however, we have all experienced in the last year after the COVID-19 crisis that healthcare systems are fragile, and the search for new antibiotics is very expensive, and the strengthening healthcare infrastructure can be expensive and with many problems. There are, however, long-term resilience strategies which involves controlling the amount of antibiotics used both in agricultural production and in human health. There are countries that are doing very well in this perspective, North European countries, and even Italy is actually reducing quite significantly the amount of antimicrobials that are used in production and in the healthcare system. But we tend to be, I mean, Northern Europe, Italy, and other European countries tend to be an exception if you look at the world picture, where the cell purchase and production of antimicrobials for both animal production and human consumption is actually increasing significantly through time. And so this is once again a problem which requires long-term solution, okay? So I wanted to close with a quote from a book that I love, and the message that I want to give you in this with this short presentation is that sometimes the political discussion around resilience is a political discussion which is very focused on short-term responses, okay? And with the idea that, okay, there was a shock and then we need to bounce back to the condition that we had before the shock. But this process, which is actually very positive for society, you know, because you can recover after a shock if you are resilient, is actually a process in which should involve some learning, okay? With some learning, I mean that if you are recovering for a shock only through short-term strategies and short-term policies, you're basically using the opportunity to have a long-term strategy to really cope with the root cause of the problem. And this reminds me of the rhyme of the ancient mariner, which is basically the story of this mariner which during a voyage killed an albatross, which was a symbol of the natural world. And this deed actually triggered a curse. And the crew of this ship actually dies, living in alone, haunted by ghosts and guilt. And one day, the mariner tells the story to a young man, which was initially skeptical, but is later described as a man which became sadder and wiser after this experience. Why I feel, and I think that this poem is actually useful for our discussion because I think that the entire political discussion about resilience should learn from the shock how to become sadder, but also wiser after the shock, which means also invest in long-term resilience policies and not only in short-term strategy to cope with the shock directly. And that's it from my side.
Thank you so much, Francesco, for this presentation with an economic perspective and component. Please feel free to ask questions if you have any or comment. I can start asking, are there any, let's say, does resilience show in national budgets, for instance? Is there a resilience tagging of budget posts, or is it just an idea floating around?
Well, in the last year, all European countries had actually all the national recovery plan for resilience. So, which actually, I think, were, of course, the European strategy to recover past COVID-19. And all the universities in Italy are actually working they're actually involved in project financed by the European National Resilience Plan. And my perception about those plans is exactly what I explained in this presentation, that those plans are actually helping quite a lot country when it comes to development of resilience policies, because they are, starting a discussion on this topic that wasn't present before, but they tend to be short-term focus. I mean, with exception, but they tend to be short-term focus. I mean, there's a plan for instance, what happened in Italy is that, okay, we had a problem, which is economic crisis due to COVID-19. There are funds for recovering after the problem, but there is not a long-term view on how to become more resilient in the future, how to work on the cause of the problem.
And of course, it goes against political,
yeah, of course.
cycles. Any questions? Yes. Oh, wonderful. Marina, please start.
Many thanks. Hi, I'm Marina. So if I understood you correctly, you suggest to focus more on learning processes in the context of resilience. And I would like to understand how, or is your suggestion to measure resilience by measuring the differences of learning, or the progress of learning? Is this like a measurement of resilience? And if so, how do you define learning?
Okay, no, well, I think that learning is one of the aspects, you know, it's not the only one, and it's probably not necessarily one that you should measure. What I was suggesting is that, I mean, there is one aspect of the resilient discussion, which is there's a shock. We need to cope immediately with the shock. We need alarming system, and we need all the aspects that we've been discussed before, and those are all aspects that are measurable. What I wanted to stress in this presentation is that this is not enough if we want to have a long-term strategy. Okay, so learning is something which adds to the rest, is not in alternative to the rest.
I really enjoyed the fact that you focus on the long term. I enjoy the fact that you focused on the long term, because I think that's a key issue, of course, in climate change. But in the Bulgarian project that we're working with, we're also working with preventive health, which is basically the same thing. And going back to the learning thing, is if it's very hard to get data because you have a prolonged time period, which means that you can say almost contamination of data, because the longer the time, more things could happen, which means that you can't compare one case to another case, because there are so many other things happening in the environment around it. So with that in mind, it becomes a little bit difficult for us to actually create those resilient systems. And at the same time, we have a political system, which is like non-science-based policy making all the time. So where do you see us going with that? I mean, it seems as if it's almost a impossible route, because you will have to make people believe in something that they don't actually want to believe.
Any comment on that?
Well, I have one general comment, and I think that your comment actually related to what you just said while you were walking, that there's a problem of political cycle. What I discussed is actually not considering political cycle, and political cycle means that by definition, the political process is short, in a sense, short term. Is one of the difficulties for political scientists in understanding how democratic system works, is that the political cycle is short. So imagine a long-term view as also the additional challenge of the political cycle.
Yeah, my comment or question is maybe to both speakers, because it seemed to me closely related, both your interventions. And I was wondering whether robust policies are aiming for long-term resilience rather than for short-term fixes.
I think the answer is long-term resilience, which means transformation, to use his terminology, if I got it correctly.
What do you think, Giliberto? Is robustness only for long term, or is it also for short term? Whatever those are.
When you have time, it's quite clear that you could have policy that are robust because they are capable. It's a problem of language, but again, are capable to intervene on what can be done in the short term. Because it's quite clear that, for example, anti-antibiotics, the problem is quite clear that on the long term, you have to convince doctors and people to give and to take less antibiotics. It's quite clear that you need more time, but you have to design this. So in both the cases, you need to design policies in a robust way. either in the short term, because I'm not an expert, but as a patient, I know the problem. You need to design appropriate policy to push hospitals to have higher standard in terms of cleaning and so on. So for me, in any case, these are cases of policy robustness because you need to design the policy. So this is the policy design perspective. Then if he calls, this is my point.
I can add one. Like I fully agree, and I think that there are two different ways of saying the same thing. And the point about antimicrobial resistance is even more interesting because you don't only have to convince doctor and patients, but you also have to convince livestock producer to use less antimicrobials in the production process, which means having more production cost, which also means that you need to convince consumer to spend more money if they want to purchase meat. So it's quite a complicated discussion. And without policy support, this is not, without robust policy support, this is not likely to happen.
No.
For me.
Okay, thank you so much again, Francesco. Okay, and we move over to our last speaker of today. I should also say that Giliberto will have to leave in a few minutes, so no chance to talk to him, I guess, afterwards. But you can always reach him through the project and Matias, etc., if you have any questions or follow-up. Anyway, let's move on to Valeria Rijana, who is originally from Buenos Aires in Argentina, right? Yeah, an urbanist and researcher from there, but is now working at the International University of Catalunya in Barcelona, which is having some resilience stress right now, right?
Thank you.
What's the point? Here's the slide. Should work.
Awesome. Okay, so hello everybody. Okay, so as presented before, I'm Valeria Rijana. I'm a member of the Urban Resilience Network, and I'm the co-director of Master in about urban sustainability for urban resilience for sustainability transitions in the Universidad Internacional of Catalunya. I'm very pleased to be here talking to all of you. Lorenzo Telleri, he's the chair of our research network, and he wanted to be here as well, but unfortunately couldn't. So we're co-designing this presentation for all of you, who I hope find interesting on our insights on community resilience, which are very aligned with the previous presentations, of course. First of all, I wanted to tell you a bit what the Urban Resilience Research Network is about. So we have more than 800 members around 50 countries. And it was created in 2010 with the intention to understand the multidisciplinarity of urban resilience. We understand that resilience is basically well, a complex capacity, and it's around everywhere in the city, and you can find it from different perspectives. We're going to be centered in community resilience by understanding that is part of a whole system. Some of our scholars, members of the URNET, are basically pursuing efforts on understanding the alignment between sustainability and resilience. We understand that resilience per se is not always a positive concept, that it has like to be aligned with sustainability in terms to be desirable. But it is really important, and you will listen this, I will repeat it a couple of times, that we believe that we don't build resilience, that you need to manage resilience. To do that, well, basically for you to understand the concept on where we, how do we do the research and how we're working on this, the Urban Resilience Research Network also has research education where the master is framed, and we have a resilience lab in Barcelona. So I think this is very aligned with all of you that are working on labs. We are trying to understand what's happening in the ground and reaching a bit the concept like what's happening on the territory, and understanding what's happening in the research and trying to bridge the gaps between those two. Enough from us. I'll try to Well, to go through some case studies to grasp a bit more our perspective on urban resilience and the capability of communities. So 2007, Barcelona had a big blackout. So more than half of the city was without electricity for more than 3-4 days. And this was because one of the main substations was burned, basically. And, well, of course, chaos in the city, right? Like no traffic lights, hospitals without electricity, all the private houses without electricity as well. And what happened was that they decided that, of course, they needed to make the network more robust, as said before, to redundancy infrastructure. And they did that. They upgraded the infrastructure. They invest 300,000 euros in creating another substation, right? So yes, they made a resilient system, basically, because they tackle one of the most important principles in resilience, that is robustness, as we said before, and redundancy. But they make sure that today, if that happens, like again, the city won't be on a blackout. They will recover electricity in a couple of hours. But what our point here is that after that, what happened is that lots of communities, organizations that are already involved in power dynamics, in different alternative electricity, ways of creating, they started asking what happens if, instead of investing the 300,000 euros in another substation and reinforcing the centralized system, basically, they invested in different networks that will complement itself through the community, right? And what happened after that is that basically those 300,000 euros were charged to the bills of the people on the Endesa and Red Española de Energía. And that meant that, of course, the community paid for it. But apart from that, like having the option of two different scenarios, one that would reinforce the centralized system, as said before, upgrading the infrastructure, achieved the same result in robustness and redundancy of the system than the one that could have empowered all the community. So this example, as the next one, are both examples trying to understand which is the role of the community resilience in our resilience practices. So this is another example of Mexico City. This, I'll go really quickly through it because it's we don't really care about the details, the technical details itself. But the interesting thing is that there's this study. It talks about how in Mexico City, that is one of, it's a very populated city, it's one of the third more populated cities in the world after, I think, Tokyo and Delhi, if I'm not wrong. They have like 6 million people on the metropolitan area. And big part of that people are vulnerable to floodings. This study centers specifically in Valle del Chalco, that was receiving at the moment lots of flooding. There was a big one on 2010. The urban sprawling was still increasing, and they needed to solve the water management in this city. So these basically, the Mexico City government in that moment had an amazing plan, a resilience plan, trying to tackle a lot of the issues, of the urban resilience issues, and they made amazing results. They achieved amazing results on carbon neutrality, for example. But when it came to the part that they needed to work with the community, empower the community to create a resilience water management network, they couldn't do it. They basically stopped the program there and reinforced the same channel that you see there, the Acapulco channel, for harvesting the water. So what we can see again is that these the barriers to achieve community resilience are not only they're not technical, basically they are political, as Giliberto was saying before. So these basically take us to ask us, so is there the role of community resilience recognized and valued within resilience practices? So I'm quoting here City Resilience Network framework that says that the role of civil society has been not properly recognized in providing urban services, but it does play a key role as a factor increasing city resilience. And then Arup that said that social practices were many times the main vehicle that communities or cities would use to deal with problems. So as we can see, like the role of community resilience is recognized in institutions. We understand how important it is. But then when it comes to the practice, this graphic is really interesting. It's from Arup when they had to create the 100 Resilient City framework. And they did a study in 18 cities around the globe, some big cities, some small cities. And basically what they map is how many, how was the investment that they were doing in resilience actions in these factors? Yeah. So on the left, on the Y axis, you have the amount of actions, and on the rest you have the resilience factors. So the first three factors, basic needs, human life, self-worth, human life, protect, maintain, and enhance its assets, are basically like the hardcore of resilient principles or resilience actions to it somehow. And of course, you can see how many actions they were, how big the investment was in those actions. Mostly, of course, in the one related to assets. That is the one that we can measure and we can easily understand how rapidly we can lose it, right? When it comes to the rest of the factors, so when it comes to human relationships, knowledge, education, innovation, justice, equity, prosperity, economic prosperity, the actions that they were investing on are really, really few, are much less than on the hard part, or the hard skills of resiliency or capabilities of resilience. So this again shows that even if the role of community resilience is recognized, the importance of the role, then when it comes to the practice, it's really hard to prioritize it in terms of the actions that will lead to our community resilience. So to be quickly, because I'm sure I'm already late. Okay. Two examples on the role of communities in two different situations. So we have California in the fires of 2003. Very briefly, what a community and an organization basically provide access to GIS data to understand, to help the government to predict better the spread of the fires. It was a really game changer, the organization of the community, and it changed how the system was creating, how the communication with the community and the possibility to predict the spread of the fires was happening. And on Ganges, this is in Bangladesh, is in the Delta. This is framed, I don't know if you remember, but around 2007, early 2008, there was a huge peak on food prices that affected the whole world. So the global, the formal system was really suffering. So everybody, like every country, suffered increases on the food prices. So all the communities that were outside, like the how would say the formal market, that were in the borders, they all basically were cut out of global market. So what happened was that communities like the one in Ganges, that it's really big, I think it's like around 40 million people, it's a lot of people, they not only not suffer from food insecurity, but they increase their incomes. And how did this happen? They used the black market network that they had already in use for other things, and they created a regional local circular economy market that allowed them to secure the food scarcity in that moment. So really, it is an amazing example on how communities, when they are like out of how communities can reorganize themselves and create a resilience process even without like the formal systems. So something really quickly again about what's happening in Catalonia right now. Regarding community empowerment. In 2016, the Ministry of Labor and Social Economy created La Red de Ateneos Cooperativos, that is a network of cooperatives. There are 16 and they're around Catalonia. And within these 16 or 14, I don't remember, umbrellas of cooperatives, we have 360 social economy organizations. And it is really interesting. I think it's a really good example of the government trying to change a bit the game. This is the one that is in Barcelona, the Goopolis, and they are tackling all these spheres that you can see there. That is migration, economy, feminist economies, eco-social transition, and agroecological conscious consume, if it would be translated like that. And I think it's a really good example. It will be a really nice example in a couple of years to study if trying to change the game from bottom up, it really helps to empower a community. You can see, like I can talk a bit more from the Barcelona perspective, but you can see in Barcelona how they're like all around the ground. They're using the public infrastructure for capacity buildings, and they are cooperatives building social housing. So there are a lot of things happening from the ground up. And we think it might be an amazing initiative to study in a couple of years and see if it really helped to make the community more resilient. That being said, we don't want like to send a message that if you tackle the community resilience in a city, then you'll have a resilient system. That is not the idea, of course. Working with communities and understanding the communities is really complex and difficult. So citing Mulligan, the concept of community resilience brings to light further emergent tensions between continuity and change, resistance and transformation, and inclusion and exclusion. So it is important to ask ourselves, and I think, Giliberto, you cited something like this too, like resilience of what to what and resilience for whom, right? Who is the community? Are we, every time that we tackle somebody, some part of the community, we need to make sure we're understanding the complexity of the whole system, right? So this leads me to understand that if we have the trade-off and we agree that that community resilience empowerment has trade-offs, then we need to shift the paradigm, building resilience instead of from building resilience to managing resilience, as I said in the beginning. And this is necessary to align the urban resilient thinking that is linked to sustainability with urban resilient building practices that is linked to business as usual, as I said before, reinforcing the same centralized infrastructures that we have. And this is really important if we want to tackle a synergy framework among sustainability, resilience, and equity. And this, just for closing, there are some tools that can help us understand the communities. It is important to understand, well, there's Erneston, he developed a really interesting tool to map basically in social relationships and to understand shapes and typologies of social networks within a territory. it is important for us to understand that there are ties and dependencies every time we work with communities, influence, power. And that being said, to close, I would like to share with you how we are from the research and network dealing or trying to understand a bit more community resilience. So in February, we're having a workshop in Barcelona that you are all invited. It's from our lab to work on barriers and enablers to community resilience. The idea is to publish a special issue on frontiers. We had already some workshops before this one that will contribute to the special issue, and we think like it is very important to understand how how can we contribute to disarm those barriers and to enhance the enablers, right? And we're also having in April a festival in Barcelona that I'm also inviting you all. This festival is from the lab as well, and the idea here is to break a bit the silos in Barcelona. This is something that we think happens a lot. So in Barcelona, we have a lot of different communities working on resilience. So we have the cooperatives, as I said before. We also have the academics that are doing a lot of research and understanding these alignments that I was talking about before. But we also have all the engineers working on the specific coefficient that you need when flooding comes. Like we have a lot of different universities working separated on the ground in Barcelona on resilience. We have the municipality working on an alarmment system that is really interesting to understand how you can see the whole city. And we think that this is very important to create a more resilient community in Barcelona. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Valeria.
You're welcome.
It's almost 6 o'clock, but you have your time, of course, and we will keep you for a few minutes because I want to ask a couple of questions, and I'm sure the audience also is willing to do that. I have not seen any questions online, but if you who are online want to ask something, please write it in the chat. I think we'll start off with Martin right away.
I'm thinking community resilience. I'm thinking just thinking about Scandinavia. There's a very strong institutionalization of everything.
This is
and
what's
the cultural component here? And that, I mean, that must be different from different countries.
So if you, I try to understand the question, what's the component, the cultural component on the community resilience? Okay. Yes, well, I think it's very important, as I said before, to understand the complexity of the community. You need to know who is the community, and that's really, really hard. I've worked with communities a lot of time back in Argentina, and like communities are diverse, of course, always. And to understand the diversity and the background that they all bring, it's needed to achieve any action. Of course, as said before in the other presentations, the political aspect of this is really, really important. And you need to have, of course, like all the government support, you need to have all the system working in favor of that. It's, I think it's community resilience is a really key factor on achieving as a resilient system, but of course, it's not the only component.
Actually, I would like to continue on that question because you brought up a really interesting thing that we haven't heard about today, and that is resistance. Because, of course, it's like peace. Who can be against peace? Who can be against resilience? So it's a non-issue, really. But when you try to maybe formulate policies and later when you want to implement different things, there might be resistance. And I don't have a question on this, but what is your take maybe on the resistance part when it comes to resilience?
Well, I think it's really important to understand first of all, that resilience is not always desirable. Like it's not always a positive outcome when it comes of resilience. A system can be resilient, as Gilberto said before, and I think Francesco said as well. And that doesn't mean that it's something positive by itself. So it needs to be aligned with other concepts like sustainability to achieve positive goals. So maybe the resistance can come on that way, like to understand that well, basically that we cannot build the resilience because it's already in the city. It has to be managed, and it has to be managed aligning it with these other concepts and perceptions.
So I think this question is discussed a bit everywhere, but if it's already difficult to convince policymakers to work to manage resilience because they think about the short term and not the long term visions, how do we convince society and how do we engage society to work with resilience?
Well, it's a great question, and I think if we all had the answer, everything would be easier. But I do think that first of all, like there are some alignments that I think are very practical for this. So you need to empower community. You need to like it's not education; it's capacity building. You need to make the community understand that they can manage. Like systems, whole systems. The thing is that it's really hard to break the inertia. How would say the inertia? Okay, the inertia. Okay, of the system, because we are like governments and mostly centralized institutions are very used, and we are all very used that all the control goes through the mainstream is the infrastructures that we have. We are used. No. We don't think we can manage as community water, like although our water provisions, we don't think we can manage our electricity provisions, but we can. Like it's about making those systems redundant and those systems resilient. It's not about leaving the other system. It's about complementary both and understanding that we can share possibilities. But that means that from the other side, they need to let go some control over all of that. And that's the hard part to achieve.
Thank you. I just have one last question, and it comes from our online audience. Asemina is asking something about the political aspects of research, because research is not apolitical. It's not objective necessarily. And certainly, even if our data is objective or are objective, the way we use them, the way we frame them, and then how we communicate the results can be very politicized. And since you are part of this research network, is that an issue for you? And if so, how are you tackling that political side of research?
Well, I do believe that, of course, everything is a bit political. As I said before, this research network has 800 members, so imagine that we have a big diversity on political views. I think on research and on these topics, of course, as you try to be as objective as you can, but tendencies, like we're all influenced on tendencies. We try to get as close as we can to the data. But basically, I think it's about interdisciplinarity. We work with different disciplines from different backgrounds from different parts. So it's really hard to one political view to go through the whole process of merging all the different views. So I think that could be a good filter to prevent maybe a too strong political view.
Thank you. At least part of it, yeah. Thank you so much, Valeria, for your talk and discussion. Like I said, Giliberto left the room. Geez, it sounds like Elvis has left the building. Valeria is here, and Francesco, you're also staying a little bit, right? Both of you. So in case you people in the room have more questions, feel free to approach them. And with this, I would like to close this conference and thank the online audience and everybody here in the room. We have listened to 3 excellent speakers. First, it was Giliberto about robustness on policy, and then Francesco talked about economics and learning from different aspects, and then Valeria gave some examples of cases and how the research network function. And maybe with this in mind, we can go home and design better policies for a resilient Europe. We'll see. I will ask people in the room to stay for a couple of minutes for some practical information. And for people online, I would like to thank you for your attendance and your questions, and welcome you back. Next time, there is an online webinar in the project. Thank you for me. I'm Jörgen Sparf and have been moderating this. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.